Hello, welcome to another edition of HSF Conversations, our podcast or interview videos where we talk about various issues that are coming up or subjects that have caught our eye. And occasionally we talk about books that we've recently read or that we know that are coming out that we find interesting. And so that's what we're actually going to do today. We're going to talk about a book that is going to be released in August by Welch College Press, and it is edited by two of our regular contributors here at the Helwas Society Forum, Mr. Matthew Bracey and Mr. Christopher Talbot. They have been working on this book for a while. They've put together an excellent book that draws from lots of different academics who are writing about how the Christian worldview applies to their various areas of study. And the book's title is Christians in Culture, Cultivating a Christian Worldview for All of Life. That will be coming out on August the 15th. You can pre-order now either at Amazon, where you can get it for $29.99, or Welch College Press, where you can get it for $24.99 as a pre-order. And we will provide links for that in the at the bottom of the page. So we encourage you to go and take a look at that and to make your pre-orders soon. Well, let's begin by talking about what exactly inspired you to begin putting this book together, finding the authors to write, and then editing it.
Well, some years ago, Welch College did a general education revision, and as a part of that revision, the faculty passed a series of courses that we call Christianity, Culture, and Worldview. And the goals, the objectives of the courses, with those in mind, it was hard to find a book that precisely fit the parameters of those objectives. And so for that first course in the sequence, we have, since that time, by and large, pulled from miscellaneous articles here, miscellaneous articles there that other people wrote. And after a few years, we thought that it would be good to have all of this stuff in one volume. But we thought it would be good for students and for people interested in this subject, Christians and culture, to hear not simply from other people, but from us, from their teachers. Both Chris and I have been very much involved in the shaping of this course and teaching of this course. And so some years ago, we began to brainstorm about what a book would look like. So hypothetically, rather than having 15 miscellaneous articles, that's here, there, and everywhere, what if we had 15 chapters on relevant subjects? And so that's what we started doing. It's a multi-volume work. There are, I think, 3 actually HSF members in the book. There's Chris and I, and then of course you, Philip, have some chapters as well. And you think broadly about Christians in culture. What is culture? What are the spheres of culture? What are the topics of culture? And you have things like culture is comprised of sports and technology and the arts and politics and economics and history and theology and philosophy, and on and on and on and on. So in this book, we have a chapter or two, for each and every one of these topics.
Yeah, no, I mean, to Matt's point, I think our main goal was to try to equip young people, young students. Throughout most of our editing process, we thought about the college freshman that was going to come in that had grown up in the church and had thought about some of these things, but maybe wasn't able to piece it all together yet. And so as we were writing our chapters and editing through, we thought about, what type of things do they need to know? And we admit in the introduction that we haven't been exhaustive in our chapters here. So there's plenty more to be said. There's plenty more books to be written about this, but we were really trying to think through what are some main areas that we want to address. The other thing I would say too is we were also trying to think through kind of a vision of what this would look like as a school as well. And so one of the things we did is made sure all of our contributors were faculty here at Welch. And so I think it speaks to a little bit of our vision for education, that here it is in one book, an integration of all of these different disciplines under the umbrella of a Christian worldview, and seeing how they work in harmony with one another rather than kind of in a fragmented fashion.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting because I remember that when I was in grad school, one of my professors, we were talking about various things related to American or history of American religion. That he kind of critiqued the idea of a Christian worldview because it seemed so kind of abstract and amorphous to him. And one of the things that I've been struck by with this book is that it is starting to apply these abstract principles that we all talk about, these very universal principles, in very particular fields and in very particular instances, and really working through, well, how does a Christian worldview, a robust biblical, grounded in the great tradition, biblical understanding of each one of these subjects, how does that flesh out? And so I guess one of the things that I was curious about is, as you were working through each of these chapters, these are from fields that aren't necessarily your specialties. What surprised you as you were going through, where you go, I hadn't really thought about how the Christian worldview applied in these various areas. And so I'm just curious, what surprises did you come across that you thought that's going to be very interesting, and I'm excited for others to see that as well?
Yeah, I think Matt would agree with this. But one of the treats to editing this book is you're coming across the way in which different experts in their field, faculty members here, are integrating the worldview, the Christian worldview, according to their own discipline, and getting to think, oh, that's pretty neat. Like the way that they're able to bring that in, and this person's able to bring it in, and they all work like I said, like in harmony with one another. And so, not being an expert in English or in science or in Old Testament theology or whatever it might be, but getting to see how these different people are applying these principles across all these different disciplines. Was this a really neat thing, I think, to experience as an editor? Um, I'm going to butcher the quote, but there's a quote by E.J. Cornell where he says that the modern student, kind of in the secular university, walks from class to class in a fragmented fashion because nothing has anything to do, nothing is related to anything else, right? You go over here and you do this, you go over here and you do this. And again, it's a really special thing, I think, to be able to teach a class and to edit a book that gets to be the hub of all of the disciplines together, and to see how everything really is reconciled in the gospel itself.
I was teaching a class last night, and I've been having students summarize books they chose for a book review project. And last night, a student was reviewing a book where he was reviewing some work that was done about why people aren't staying in the church, even though they were in the church when they were young. And one of the themes to come out of this study is that people learn when they're young Bible stories. So we're really good at teaching Bible stories, but there seems to be something of a hole about how does this apply to the actual things of our world? So it's all well and good, and it is all well and good to know stories about Abraham and Joseph and Daniel and all this stuff. But what does that have to do with, say, communism? What does that have to do with the way that we think about Twitter? And so on and so forth. Our treatise, as Frugal Baptist mentions in chapter 1, that we believe that the scriptures are indeed sufficient for salvation and for worship, and indeed for all of godliness, all of life. So if we attest to that and confess to that as Baptists, we need to show how that's the case. And I'm proud of this book in that it does that. To Chris's point, we're quote unquote experts in the fields of the chapters we're writing, but as editors, we've gotten to read how others have brought together the sufficient principles of Scripture into their areas, and it's really quite interesting. So it's exciting to see the way in which there is, in fact, a unity of knowledge in God and His revelation, and indeed the Scriptures are sufficient for everything we could think about. So just as we learn about, say, the doctrine of the Trinity, and the doctrine of Christ and the doctrine of the church. We can also learn about practical theology. What does doctrine have to do with, what does theology have to do with all these other subjects of culture? So I think that this book does that. And I hope that it's helpful not only to students and in shaping their worldview, but also to people more broadly who are interested in these subjects.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this. Obviously, you've noted that this book was really kind of inspired by how do we help instruct our students, but it has lots of broader applications for lots of different people. And I've been thinking about that recently. I was reading a short book on political philosophy by a man named David Miller, who comes at political philosophy from essentially a neoliberal perspective. But in that book, he argues that a pluralistic society has to free people from the constraints of religion and tradition and community, that those are forms of bondage that people have to be liberated from. And he argues that intentionally, for people to be liberated from that, one of the ways that you do that is to essentially, what he advocates for is the education system that Chris brought up a minute ago, that Carnell points out as a negative, right? That everything gets splintered off, that the whole idea is simply to expose you to lots of different things and then let you kind of freely decide what you want to be on your own. And that has all sorts of implications for us as Christians that we don't even think about, because we're brought up in a world that thinks in those terms. And instead of, like, say, the Puritans or anybody else throughout church history, we tend to think of our Bible reading, our devotion time, that's one area of our life. And then what I do when I go to school, that's a different area of my life. Or what I do when I go to my job, that's a different area. And we think of them in very siloed ways. And I think that's because of that neoliberal pluralism that has really dominated the West for the last 150 years. And so I think that this book really does try to address that and to what would you call it, reconcile some of those problems and help to bring those connections back together for lots of people. All right, so we've noted that a lot of this was aimed for students who are college level, freshmen and sophomores even, and so it's an accessible book. But our audience for this, and I would assume also your audience for the book, is much broader than just our student body as well. So in what ways do we think that this book can help the clergy in preparing their congregants better to serve Christ in their various vocations? And along with that, would this book be accessible to the average layman as they work through on their own, what does it mean to serve Christ in the world?
Well, first of all, I think that with respect to clergy, and more broadly with respect to teachers in the church, teachers of classes and so on and so forth, I very much think that this book can help them, because it can equip them to help them to teach, to show the relationship between the Bible and the rest of the world. Of course, the particular applications are going to vary congregation to congregation to congregation, but it at least over the course of 15 chapters offers a lot of ways of thinking about different subjects that can inform these various areas. I do think that laypersons can benefit from this, and that it would be helpful to them, and that they could understand what it is. I mean, because we wrote it with the intention of 18, 19, 20-year-old college students to read it. We wrote it at the same level of the ways in which the articles we were previously assigning were written, and so we believe that this could that one it's would be helpful to them. They could make sense of it. They could benefit from it. In some cases, I think it's going to touch on their disciplines or their spheres specifically, whatever sphere that they're in. In other cases, though, it'll give them a means by which to think about whatever sphere they are in. So, for example, we don't have a chapter, say, on what it means to be a Christian in if you're a waitress. We don't have a chapter on, we're not that specific, but there are certainly principles and things in there that's going to help. I think everybody. One of the chapters that I wrote concerns this particular issue of vocation, and particularly for people who are just everyday folks, working in construction, working in restaurants, working in banks. I think that chapter and thinking about the way in which a biblical worldview and a Christian worldview really honors and elevates what they do in the Lord, whether it's in the church or in the world, could be really empowering in a good way and in a helpful way.
I think every single person should buy a copy of this book.
Amen.
Or two, if they feel so inclined. But yeah, to your point, I think for someone that's growing in their faith and is really thinking critically, like in the right way, they're trying to analyze and they're trying to be thoughtful about their Christianity. My hope and my prayer is that this is a really good book for them. So even like, I can see kind of mature kids in a youth group that really want to like sink their teeth into something, that this would be good. I think pastors, I think teachers in the church, anybody that's really wanting to think critically about the Christian worldview, that this would be really helpful to them. We tried really intentionally for there to be a logical flow through the book, and so the first part of the book doesn't really make up half of it, but the first part of the book is trying to lay down the foundation for a Christian worldview. And so you have questions about cultural paradigms and the influence of ideas and kind of frameworks that we want to set in place there. But then the latter half of the book goes through these different disciplines that we've been talking about vocation and literature and technology and innovation and science and sports and recreation, all of this. And what I think that does well then is it allows someone then to come back to the book at different times as they might have further questions. And so someone could sit down and read the book through, and it would make logical sense. There's a progression to it. But as they run into stuff in their faith, as they might think about the integration of science and faith, or about technology, that they can come back to those individual chapters and kind of explore again and say, well, what does the Christian worldview have to say about these things? And how can I think Christianly and biblically about whatever topic it is that I'm trying to address?
Well, one of the things that I had thought about as we were preparing for this was our previous discussion about Tom Nelson's book about the flourishing pastor, and how clergy are called to help their congregants live out that Christian life, that Christian worldview in their specific vocations. And one of the things that I know that we had discussed in various places and times is how difficult that is for a minister who is technically trained in ministry, or maybe has a secondary training of some sort, but their primary focus is on how do I, serve as a minister. But then as part of that, they're also having to try to think through, well, what about my congregant who works in a hospital? Or what about my congregant who, is a logger? Or, you have these very widely disparate vocations. And so it requires a lot of work to just kind of think through that. And one of the things that I think that this book is really beneficial for is that it does bring a lot of those areas together. So as a minister, when you have people in your congregation who are doing various things, you can go through this and say, here's some basic principles, or even better, would you read, even if it's just a chapter, would you read this chapter with me and let's discuss that over coffee 1 week? I think that's a really good way to get those conversations started in a it might maybe loosen some of the pressure on those conversations, instead of just saying, hey, I've been thinking about how you should do your job. Instead, it can be a lot more of, hey, would you come along with me and let's think through these things together. And so the minister can help bring the theology aspect to bear and really kind of flesh that what is laid out in each chapter. Whereas the person who's in that very discipline, they can begin to work through those things as well. And so I think it can help to serve in that really important capacity. I guess another thing that I was curious about, each of these chapters tries to give and as Chris has already noted, tries to give kind of an overview, an introduction to this kinds of thinking. This has also been interesting for me writing a couple of chapters, was that it then also inspired me to think, I really want to write more on this going forward, to really expand on certain topics within this. So I'm just curious, for the two of you, were there certain topics that were covered that you, as you read along, or perhaps where you wrote and you thought, when I get a chance, I want to come back and I want to explore this further. I want to expand this more. And I realize I say we're going to wait because all three of us are currently writing our dissertations. So we have a lot of projects that are kind of piling up in a queue after that. But I wondered if there were some things that sparked in your mind as you were going through the book.
Yeah, I was, as you're editing through this, you read it, I don't know how many different times, and you're going through different chapters at different stages and different drafts. But I was really, and I told him this maybe about a month or two ago. I was reading back through Frank Thornsberry's chapter on literature and the Logos, and like what it means for us to be people like centered on the Word. And I was just marked by like how well he crafted that chapter and addressed those topics and those ideas. And it's a lot of it's stuff that I've thought about before. But to your question, it really kind of sparked a renewed interest in me to kind of go back to this idea of Christ as the Logos, as the center for learning and knowledge, and really the basis for like what we do is people that write, and so he did a great job on that chapter. I told him he did a good job on the chapter, and again, I think that's one of our desires with these different chapters and having different contributors, is not to address these topics comprehensively or exhaustively, and I think even some of our endorsers picked up on this, but rather we hope that we're laying enough of a foundation that when people read the book, that they have a desire then to go and to read more and to find out more about these topics.
I'd like to pick up on, well, one, to answer your question, but two, to pick up on some things Chris was saying. First of all, kind of going back to our previous question about what benefit clergy, lay people gain from this. Chris alluded to this just now, but the authors really are trying to show the relevance of say a principle in scripture, a passage in scripture, to the things of our everyday life. So Chris mentioned, what does a theology of the Logos, a theology of the Word, have to do with the way that we think about language, the way that we think about words? Thinking about one of your chapters, Philip, what does, shall we say, the fifth commandment's command to honor our mothers and fathers, how should that inform the way that we think about history and the way that we think about the tradition that history bequeaths to us? What relevance does Philippians 4:8, that we should meditate on those things that are true and lovely and so on and so forth, pure? How does that implicate the way that we think about the arts, the way that we think about culture? How does the fact that you have all kinds of work being honored in the scriptures, how does that implicate the way that we think about dirty jobs, so-called? There's that show, Dirty Jobs, and on and on and on and on. So we really try to not, as was said before, it's not just abstraction. We really do try to be critical and critical and careful and relevant. What is the fact that the church in Acts shared a lot of things in common? How does that implicate the way that we think about economics, the way that we think about wealth and poverty and government? How does the fact that, Jesus at times with his disciples got away for leisure, how does that implicate the way that we think about work and rest and recreation and sports and on and on? Chris also mentioned endorsers, and I just want to make a point to say we've let quite a few people read this, and we're really quite proud of the endorsements that we've gotten. So David Dockery did the foreword. We also have endorsements from Dr. Moeller at Southern, We have endorsements from Ralph Enlow. He's the retired president of one of our creditors, ABHE. We have an endorsement from the late Harry Reeder at Broward Presbyterian. We have endorsements from Daniel Darling of Southwestern, Kenneth Keithley of Southeastern, Dr. Moody of our National Association, Timothy Paget at the Colson Center, Jacob Schatzer at Union University, Mark Ryan at Covenant Theological Seminary, and then Bruce Little at Southeastern, and Daniel DeWitt at Southwest Baptist University. So we've got a broad sampling of people who have read this book and have agreed to endorse it, which I think speaks to what these authors have brought to the table. As far as the question, did anything that I write inspire me more? Most definitely. One of my chapters is on conservatism, and you might say that rather this chapter emerged out of the PhD work that I've been doing and the dissertation that I'm writing. It's not one and the same as my dissertation. My dissertation is something else, but yeah, these questions related to Edmund Burke and the way that our principles should inform the way that we think about the past, tradition, the present, future, preserving the good of what's been handed down to us, reforming the not so good that's been handed down to us, so that tomorrow can, we hope, be better than today. This kind of thing. I'm definitely interested in writing a lot more in that. I also have a chapter in the arts, and I really find philosophical aesthetics quite interesting, and I'd like to spend more time writing there as well.
Well, that's great. For my own part, I wrote a chapter on history and tradition, and then a chapter on economics. And both of those were really good experiences for me in my graduate work. Obviously, it's been in history. Writing that section on history and helping me kind of nail down a good, concise thinking about my historiographical kind of method, but also just thinking on the matter and philosophy. That was really helpful for me in lots of ways, and that has been something I've been interested in. But it really made me want to go back and find other ways to explore that more, and also researching the concept of tradition and what it was and how it was related to history. That was really interesting for me, and it has been very helpful for me personally as well to learn how to build a comfortable and healthy relationship with tradition. And that's really hard to have in our world. We tend to overswing in one direction or another. Either we're just all very kind of contemporary and we don't want to have anything to do with things that are in the past, or we can kind of slip into traditionalism with the capital T, where we only want what was in the past and we have no sense of kind of flexibility to engage the present or the future. And thinking through those things really was helpful for me, and I found that very enjoyable and something I want to get into more. Well, I appreciate you two taking time to talk about this book. We are excited about it coming out. Again, we encourage you to pre-order the book either at Amazon or at Welch College Press, and we'll put both of those links below. And we encourage you to buy the book and then to review it. Give us some feedback. Let us know what you think about the book. We're excited about it, and we think that it's going to be very helpful for people within our denomination, but then also far beyond it. We think that this will be a very helpful book for people from various backgrounds, which Mr. Bracey alluded to a minute ago with the list of endorsers. And so until next time, we'll see you later.